Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua. We're looking at Joshua chapter 22, which recounts the time when there was almost a civil war in the early life of Israel. Now, we started this chapter yesterday and we saw that after the division of the land among the tribes, the residents of Gilead, that is the east side of the Jordan River, were ready to return home. You remember the tribes of Reuben and Gad and half-tribe of Manasseh, they received their inheritance in Gilead, the east side of the Jordan River. But on their return home, they build an altar. And that provokes terrible response from the other Israelite tribes. They prepare to go to war against the tribes in Gilead because of this altar. So we're at the point of a civil war. But before the war begins, they send a delegation to Gilead to ask why you built this altar. Now, the question in our mind is, why was the building of an altar such an offense to the other Israelites? Why were they prepared to go to war because the tribes of Gilead had built an altar? Well, we're told that in verse 15. So they went to Gilead, that is the representatives of the other tribes. They went to Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and they said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now?" Now, at this point, we begin to understand what has caused the problem. The other tribes see this building of an altar as rebellion against the Lord. They see this as breaking faith with the God of Israel. Now, why would they consider the building of this altar an act of rebellion, breaking faith with God, with the Lord? Well, to understand that, we have to turn back to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, in which Moses had given instructions about how they were to worship when they entered the promised land. Moses said, you're going to cross the Jordan, you're going to take possession of the land, and this is what will happen. Verse 11 of Deuteronomy chapter 12. Then to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, there you are to bring everything I command you, that is, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithe, your special gifts, all the things you have vowed to the Lord. And there you are to rejoice before the Lord your God. And then in verse 13 it says, be careful not to sacrifice your burnt offerings anywhere you please. Offer them only at the place the Lord will choose in one of your tribes, and there observe everything that I command you. Now remember, during the wilderness wanderings, they worship at the tabernacle. Moses had received the instructions for the tabernacle on Mount Sinai. That is their place of worship. That is where the altar is, in the courtyard of the tabernacle. And Moses had told them, once you enter the promised land, you will choose a place, the Lord will direct you, where the tabernacle will be established. There you will offer your offerings to the Lord. Now, at this time in Israelite history, that place is Shiloh. They have established Shiloh under God's direction as the place for worship. The tabernacle is in Shiloh. It will remain there for many, many years. That's where they are to go and make their offerings. But now, the Israelite tribes hear that those residents of Gilead have built another altar, not in Shiloh, another altar, and they assume they're going to make offerings there. That is a violation of the covenant. And so they come and they say to the residents of Gilead, why have you violated the covenant? You've broken faith with the God of Israel. He told us we are to worship only at the one place where his name will be established. That is in Shiloh. So why have you built this other altar? They see the sin as so heinous, as a rejection of the God of Israel, a rejection of his covenant. They've broken faith with God. That's what the other tribes think. And so they're prepared to go to war over this matter. And so they say, why did you break faith with God? Why did you build another altar aside from the only one God established, which is at Shiloh? And they also liken it to other sins that has been committed over the years. They go on to say, was not the sin of Peor enough for us? Up to this very day, we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on our community of the Lord. And are you now going to turn away from the Lord? So they liken this building of another altar with the sin of Peor. Now, what is that? Well, that occurred a few years earlier, and that is told us in Numbers chapter 25. This was a great sin of Israel. So turn to Numbers chapter 25, the first few verses. Now, while Israel was staying at Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices of their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and they bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. So they remember this time in their past when they were in Moab, and some of the Israelites began to worship Baal, whom the Moabites were worshiping. And they engaged in that worship at the altar of Baal. And a great plague fell on the community. So the tribes of Israel remind the residents of Gilead, don't you remember that sin and how we were punished for it because it was rebellion against God? We've still not really cleansed ourselves completely from that sin, the stain of that sin. And now you've done it again. You've built another altar. It seems to us you're intending to worship other gods. Why have you done such a thing? So you begin to see how serious this sin was in the eyes of the Israelites. So they're asking, why did you do such a thing? Now, tomorrow we're going to see how the residents of Gilead respond, what they've done in building this altar. But that'll be for tomorrow's session. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Joshua.